Crime myths. This is an important topic because essentially what we have in America is our media reporting information in a way that skews the public perception of not only the rate of crime, but who typically commits these crimes. This creates a lot of important issues in our society, especially with regards to criminology, because if you'll remember the connections that we made from last week, it is the public perceptions and opinions that eventually shape policy, which of course is then used to create laws. The next issue that we have is that newspapers pay a disproportionate amount of attention to white crime victims. They'll feature lengthy articles about white crime victims, and it gives the impression that there are more white victims than the statistics actually support. Additionally, when they do have stories about African Americans who are victimized, they have a tendency to write shorter stories and thereby not giving as much attention to the issue of African Americans being victimized. So that, of course, all contributes to this perception that African Americans simply aren't victimized very often, and rather it's whites who are being victimized. There are also, you'll see in the newspaper, more stories that show African American offenders victimizing whites. So we not only have a perception that whites are victimized more often, but we have a perception that whites are victimized by blacks more often, even though statistics do not support that. Now finally, another statistic that we have is that whenever we see blacks and Hispanics portrayed in the media, they have a tendency to be portrayed in a menacing context as compared to white suspects. So oftentimes we'll see blacks and Hispanics in physical custody of the police, or we'll see a mug shot of them. We'll see pictures of them victimizing a stranger. We'll see pictures of them victimizing someone of a different ethnicity. So what we essentially have is this tunnel vision that's being created because all of the images that we're seeing are supporting this idea that it's African Americans and Hispanics that are out there victimizing whites, that they're disproportionately committing crimes, that they're disproportionately using drugs, when the reality is, based on population size, it is whites who are offending more often and using drugs more often, and that would be supported since whites are still in the majority of the population. The last thing is that when certain victims are portrayed, they're shown as virtuous. So we'll often see heavier coverage of small children being victimized or wealthy white women, when in reality both of those groups have relatively low rates of being victimized. Okay, there are a few other problems that we see with media coverage. Some of these other forms of skewing media coverage would include selecting people to interview that sort of share the reporter's point of view, using language to refer to criminals that's menacing, maybe saying preying on their victims, giving you the impression that these people actually committed the crime rather than waiting until they've been found guilty by a jury. They might present data that's misleading. Oftentimes white-collar crime, which is the typical crime that's committed and causes more far-reaching damage, is mostly underreported. And a lot of times the social or historical context is not presented in the stories with regard to crime. Okay, so what are essentially the effects then? All of this skewed reporting of crime has led to general public ignorance about what the real statistics are in the crime rates, and leading them to be increasingly afraid of living in America and always on the alert. You see inflated public fears and concerns about crime that are disproportional to reality. You see underlying forces that are leading to crime rates being obscured. You see a massive diversion from white-collar crime, which, as I mentioned, is really very important and very impactful and has a much farther reach in terms of how many people it affects, especially if you think about Enron and the hundreds of thousands of people that were affected by the folding of this company, and how many people lost their life savings. But we see more coverage of petty crimes committed by colored offenders, and so we sort of shift the attention away from the crimes that are really out there hurting people. And then finally, with all of this skewed reporting, you're seeing an increase of racial and ethnic stereotyping, and it's really kind of another border or boundary that we have to overcome in terms of getting our country to come together and decreasing racial tension and getting people to feel comfortable living in an integrated multicultural society. If the media is constantly portraying Hispanic and African Americans as being the perpetrators of crime, it's difficult for them to be integrated into society and trusted if they're constantly being shown as likely to be the bad guy.